This is the TPO Model KT, a budget 40 power scope, that's right, 40, with a street price of just about $300. So I got two questions. One, how is this 40 power scope only $300? And two, who is TPO? Let's skip the unboxing and just take a look at the contents of the box. This is the TPO KT. It is a 5 to 40 power long-range scope with a 56mm objective, and it is a long and heavy piece of glass here at well over 16 inches long, and that is before you add a sunshade to it. I should also point out that it comes with its own rings pre-installed in the box, and these rings, let's take a look at them just for a brief moment here. Kind of budget looking overall, not a lot of refinement on the construction here, but it does provide a lot of the features you want, like the fact that these crossbars are squared off so they function like recoil lugs, and there's two crossbars, two screws at the bottom for each of the rings, and each of the rings has 6 screws on the top, so this should provide plenty of gripping powers to keep your scope on even a heavy recoil rifle. And interestingly, this front ring has a built-in diving board. It also comes with a large diameter focus ring for your parallax focus, and let's take a look at that. Parallax goes from 20 yards to infinity, and it kind of needs that focus ring because this is a rather stiff turning parallax focus, which some people like it stiffer, so that way you don't have any chance of your focus shifting, I suppose, under really heavy recoil. But yeah, and it is a pretty large diameter parallax knob there, so yeah, you kind of need it. It's pretty stiff. And let's take a look at our windage and elevation turrets, and this is a pretty tall turret for our elevation. These are locking. You pull up to unlock. Not super loud, but loud enough. And tactile positive, though, it does feel a bit mushy, and there is a bit of play, a bit of slop in between each of the clicks. And each of the clicks is an 1/8 of an MOA, so that is a fine adjustment. And it has revolution indicators at the base of the turret there that correspond to the numbers, 3 rows of numbers on the turret itself, so you can tell how many, and it helps you figure out how many numbers. And I believe there's 30 MOA of total adjustments on there. Now, these are user resettable. You just unscrew the top here. Now, this is actually a turret top. You actually have to unscrew this top, and there is a hex screw that holds the turret to reset your turret to 0 once you have your reticle zeroed out. And let's check out our windage. Much louder. Tactile positive with still a bit of slop in between each of the clicks. And these are resettable. These look like they are hand-painted in etched numbers, and these look like laser etched numbers, and these look like printed numbers. So 3 different ways of applying your indicators, which is kind of strange. Why 3 different kinds? I'm not a fan of TPO's hand-painted type of numbers, just because it can bleed in together. Like that 9 kind of looks like a 0, and that 6 kind of looks like an 8. I much prefer the laser etch or even just the printed one. So I don't know why they chose 3 different ways to do the turret. They should have just stuck with one, whatever. And let's just take a look at our magnification ring, which turns very smoothly and easily. So it goes from 5 to 40. And we have our illumination on the reticle on our eyepiece section here, actually. We have both red and green illumination. And we'll take a look at the illuminated reticle outdoors in a bit. But it's powered by a 2032 coin battery. It comes with 2. Now let's take a look at our diopter focus, which turns also very smoothly. A little bit of grit at the top and bottom end, but otherwise pretty nice. So there you go. That's the KT. We'll take it outdoors and take it to the range and check out the glass next. Before we get started with the test, I'd just like to take a quick break here to talk about this episode's sponsor, Aura. For the cost of just a VPN, I'm getting a whole suite of security services, including $1 million in identity theft insurance, and they're even removing me from those damn data broker listings. Use my link, aura.com/moondog, and you can try them for 14 days, free. And if you use that link, you're helping to support this channel. You know, identity fraud is a real thing, and with AI, it's all too easy to spoof your identity. That's why you should try out Aura. All right, let's get back to the tests. We are looking through the TPO KT at its lowest power of 5, at the peak of Mount Davidson 1,400 yards away. And we can compare what we're seeing in the scope versus outside of the scope to see what, if any, color changes, shifts, or brightness changes are occurring. Now, what I'm seeing through the glass is a overall good color balance, but a bit of softness around the outer edges compared to the center sharpness. No noticeable chromatic aberration, and you'll usually see that in high contrast areas like where the tree line meets the sky. Now let's bring up our magnification, and with it all the faults in the glass, and we're going to stop about halfway in the scope's magnification range of 20 power here, and that's typically halfway is about the sweet spot for most scopes. And what I'm seeing here is a loss of color, contrast, and a bit of a warmer tint overall, but again, very little, if any, noticeable chromatic aberration. Now let's bring this all the way up to its maximum magnification of 40 power. And wow, okay, that eye box really closed in there. So I have to make a little adjustment to the position of the camera there because the camera can't automatically shift like our eyes and head can. Now we've lost a lot of light and contrast, but I can easily make out the trail marker sign at the top of the hill there. That is that white object just to the left and above the center crosshairs. And that is about a 3-foot sign on top of a pole, which is a good proxy for an IPSC target at this distance. We're going to take a look at the illumination starting with the red, and I just tap on the button to activate the illumination. I'm going to put my hand in front of the bell just so you can see that a little more clearly. I know the red's a little dim in broad daylight, or at least in even shadow daylight, but you just tap the buttons to change the brightness and cycle through them. And to change the color, you just press on the other button, in this case green. You can see what that looks like. We're looking through the TPO KT at our reference target's downrange at 100 yards. We have the scope set at its lowest power of 5 for our best overall image, and what I'm seeing is a very clear, sharp, very color accurate image through this glass. And this is a good opportunity to do a range of adjustments, starting with our elevation. We're going to see how far this goes, and you can already see the eye box coming in at the top there. And this scope has a very tight eye box. A very unforgiving one in any case, and that is the very top, and we're getting a little bit of, I think, some dead clicks there. Could be because it slipped down a little bit on the lock as I'm turning this, but it did feel a little geary, if that makes sense. It felt like I was feeling the teeth of the gears a lot more, very top of that. Now, here we are at the bottom, and we can really see that eye box coming in, and that's because, unlike our eyes and our head, we can't make adjustments to the position of the scope to get it right in the eye box. That was the very bottom there. Now I'm going to bring this back up, back to its factory 0 on this turret. I'm going to switch hands there because my hand actually started to cramp up. So many turns. So actually the range of adjustments is good, but the eye box is very unforgiving. Alright, let's get that back to 0. I think that's 0. These turrets are kind of mushy, so sometimes it's hard to tell if I've reached 0 or gone past it. Alright, let's take a look at our windage. And eye box is really dominating the view. Alright, that is all the way to the right. That is as far right as we can get it. Okay, let's see how far left we can get this. Going past our target. And the windage is far easier to turn than the elevation. Alright, that is as far left as it will go. So let's turn this turret back to factory 0. Alright. Now, let's bring up our magnification, and we're going to stop about halfway at 20 power. And we can see that our eye box has shifted, and the eye relief is also shifted. Going to have to adjust the camera here on the mount. Alright, we're going to conduct the nipple twister test, and this is a torture test coined by my buddy Cyclops Joe on his channel. And we're just going to turn the heck out of these turrets for a good 30 seconds and see if they'll return back to their factory 0 and bring the reticle back to its starting location. Alright, let's dial these back to factory 0 on the turrets. Again, there we go. It appears we are right back where we started, so surprisingly, even though these turrets are a little sloppy, they do track. Next, let's bring the scope up to 40 power and take a look at those reference targets in detail. Now, I've tilted down the scope so we can clearly see our resolution targets at the bottom of the board. I can make out some fine details like 2 tiny 22 caliber holes below the reactive sticker target on the bottom left, and in the optical resolution chart on the bottom right, I can make out both horizontal and vertical lines down to element 6 in group -1, and with my naked eye, finer still. That's why long-range shooters want a 40 power optic, but the TK is a budget scope, so at 40 power, its glass gets dark and milky. I'd like to thank Texas Precision Optics for sending out the KT for me to test, and now under the new TPO brand name. Previously, they've been putting out scopes under the Sniper brand name, and you can still find Sniper branded things inside of their boxes, but I, for one, am glad that they're switching over to TPO as their brand, because I always thought Sniper sounded a bit cringy. Let me know if you think Sniper is a better brand than TPO, and leave me a comment. But Texas Precision Optics puts out budget scopes, but despite being budget priced, I always found their optical quality to be a bit sharper and clearer than a lot of their contemporaries. That said, to be as inexpensive as they are, there are certainly compromises, and notably in this particular scope, it is in the build quality overall. It just looks a bit rougher and unrefined, and especially in the turrets, the elevation turret especially is very sloppy and imprecise and mushy feeling. That said, despite how they feel, they still tracked and passed the nipple twister test, so that surprised me. Also, this has a very tight eye box, and to be fair, the higher the power of the scope, the tighter the eye box, but even for a 40 power, this is very unforgiving. And when you get it up to its maximum magnification of 40, the image does get very dark and muddy looking. That said, these new TPO scopes have far less chromatic aberration than previous Sniper scopes that I've reviewed in the past, so they must be upgrading this to ED glass. So that's my guess on this. And the most notable thing about this is the affordable price. Now, if you're looking for a 40 power scope under $500, well, this has a street price under $300, so this is something that I would consider. And if you're interested in picking one up, I've included product links as well as more information in my full written review at moondogindustries.com. You'll find a link to that article in this video's description. If you use the links in that article, you help support this channel. And you can always help by simply hitting the like, subscribe, and notification bell buttons before you jump off to the next video. That's absolutely free, by the way. They don't charge you to become a subscriber to my channel. So I appreciate you taking the time to press those buttons and become a subscriber, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. God bless. Moondog, out. Hey, I'd like to know what you thought of this video. Leave me a comment or chat with me on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, MeWe, Instagram, or Locals. And if you want to see all of my videos, go to moondogindustries.com.